we often hear that being in the military doesn't teach you much about guns, and then just as often we hear the opposite, which you guys have kind of touched on a little bit. So somebody was asking which one is it, and then along with that, does the military experience change your perception of firearms as tools, and what firearms training that you received was deficient or left out? Like what could have been improved? What would have made your job easier? Like what did they not teach you that you needed? Uh, so any of that you want to touch on?
Again, it depends on what your job is in the military. Got some who are, like, for instance, a Marine Corps infantryman. That is their tool, or an Army infantryman. And then you got somebody like in the Air Force who works in the dental clinic. I mean, what the hell are they going to do with a gun? So it really does depend on what your job is. And not everybody needs to learn how to hit a bullseye at 100 yards with an M16. So it really just depends. The military is by no means a monolith.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
MOS. I mean, it's all the difference in the world. I was in a line platoon, qualified ball deuce, 249, 16, grease gun, M9, and we were at the range like either every month or like a couple of times a month. And I got to shoot G3s and work with foreign armies, and like, I mean, I got to pull a ton of peacetime trigger pulling. So yeah, I mean, I had lots of hands-on. The one giant deficiency was handguns. I mean, it was cup and saucer. It was cup and saucer, 90s style. But other than that, my rifle training was badass. And I get that a lot. Oh, well, Army rifle, whatever. Well, Fort Leonard Wood, combat engineers, we could shoot rifles. Like, it was a thing.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Nate.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like Will was saying and Brian and everyone was saying, it depends on your job. For instance, in the military, at least for me, I could always tell what somebody's job was pretty much just by the way they slung their rifle. Sometimes people sling it behind their back. Sometimes people carry it like a purse, right? For me, I always carry it at the low ready. I'm sorry, it's like I said, I came in as a motor transport operator. But, I was quickly sent to infantry line platoon where they weeded that out of me really quick. It was like, no, you always carry your weapon at the low ready. You always are ready to go. You never carry your weapon like a purse. You never sling your weapon behind your back, because how are you going to get to your weapon? So, it was some of that stuff where it's like, now it's like I could be walking around seeing other people with their weapons slung behind their back, and I'm like, yep, you're a pogue. Oh, you're a pogue. Yeah, because you can tell by the way they carry their weapon, or by how proficient they are with them, whether it's breaking it down to anything else. As far as proficiency and firearms training, I think definitely one thing that we could have done more on is stress shooting. Like actually you run in full boots and utes to your weapon, get down the prone and start shooting or something. I've only done that a few handful of times. I did it a lot more in the air marshals than I did in the military. And I found that to be one of the most proficient way, because otherwise static shooting is easy. Static is so easy, but when you need to be on the move and actually shooting, moving, communicating, I know that can be scary for a lot of people, but it's really fun and some of the best training that you'll get. Other deficiencies that we get, especially in combat situations, is like people don't really tell you how hard it really is to apply sports, and remedial action to your weapon when your weapon is all jammed up with sand, because you've been out on patrol for so long and your stuff's gunked up because of the CLP or whatever you're using gunked your weapon up. And now, oh, dang, I got to apply remedial action. I got to rip this magazine out. And no one's telling you how hard it really is when it's go time, especially how much it sucks when you raise your rifle up and it just goes click and not bang. that's like one of the worst feelings you're ever going to get. You know, that's one of those feelings that your heart stops for a second. But, you know, I mean, they tell you all the time, but I don't know if there's any training they can really do to prepare you for that other than to throw in the dummy rounds, right? But even when they throw in the dummy rounds for remediation drills, there's still issues with that too, because you're not going to get that same experience of when that magazine is stuck inside that magazine well and you just can't pull it out. You know, that's when it's like, that's a real pucker factor, as they say, because now you're just like, oh crap, I can't get this mag out. So what, you go to your secondary, oh, that's jammed up. You know, it's like they teach you weapons maintenance, but they don't teach you weapons maintenance general to the location that you're at. It's just a generalized weapons maintenance. You know, because I'm sure for Lonnie is different for how it was for me when I was in the desert. You know, because the desert is a completely different environment. So it's like you don't apply liberal amounts of CLP, you just put a thin coat on. But they're not telling you that. You know, they're always like, oh, you know, grease that baby up, let's go. No, don't ever do that. You know, some people don't even do it. They just dry fire and they just hock a loogie in their ejection port and go. You know, and use that as lube sometimes, just because how CLP just turns to gunk with sand and dust in it. So just, you know, food for thought. But that's some of the training that I think would be better.
Yeah, I think so. For me, you know, from talking to some of the kids that joined the military when I was teaching and came back and we would talk, training changed a lot from Vietnam to the current situation. So a lot of the stuff that I went through, so we had a live fire piece where, you know, you were basically low crawling underneath barbed wire while somebody's dumping M60 rounds over your head, you know, to get you used to the fact that that's what you had to be able to do. And then we also, in part of our quals, is we actually walked a path with pop-up targets. And so, you know, you'd be walking along, again, low ready. And this was an M14, by the way. This was not an M16. And, you know, the thing is you know, this thing would pop up and it would either be a low profile target or a standing target, didn't matter. And you had to either take a knee or squat down or grab cover or go prone, and then take your shot. And you only had so much time to do it because then the target would drop back down. We went through training with oddly enough, with Daisy BB rifles, and we learned how to do point and shoot. No aim. You just, they give you this, there was this little rack of tiny little silhouettes, right? About, you know, 3 or 4 feet in front of you, and they'd pop up, and then you'd have to sit there and rack it like a lever action, right? And then underneath your chin, you know, or close to it, you point it in the direction and try and knock the silhouettes down. So we had a lot of thorough training in terms of handling a rifle. I shot a .45 once for quals at a 15-yard target. And let me tell you, the 1911 .45s that the military had were just blown to shit for training. So if you could hit something with it at all, you were doing goddamn good. But, you know, I think my training was a lot different than current training is. I know that when my daughter went through the Air Force training in Lackland, I think she picked up an M16 once, and that was it. But she was flight crew, you know, she was a load master. How many fucking times are you going to need a rifle if you're flying the tail end of a 130 or on the tail end of a Stratolifter, right? Doesn't really matter. So I'm kind of like Brian and what Nate and Will said, which is really depends on what your job is, what your MOS is. I do know that when I was in Marines that I talked to, every Marine is considered a basic infantryman, regardless of what their job was at the time. And so they all got pretty good rifle training. They didn't do a whole lot of other stuff unless they wound up in a company that used different armament, and then they learned that stuff once they got there. So yeah, I wouldn't say my training was deficient, but I wasn't, at no time was I expected to be able to hit a bullseye with anything, because my job and the job of any other infantryman in Vietnam was to lay down suppressive fire and move. And when you lay down suppressive fire, basically you're just dumping mags, right? You're pointing that sucker in a general direction and you're dumping mags, and you're moving, because you don't want to be a stationary target. You don't want to have to be hunkered down. And then, like Nate said, and this is a problem I have today. I tend to run my ARs drier than most people do. Because not only just the mud and shit, but during the hot times, a lot of Vietnam is made up of red sand and clay, and it blows all over the place. And so, I tended to run mine a little drier than probably most people would think an AR should run at. The environment has a lot to do with it. If you're in a high humidity area and there's not a whole lot of gunk and shit that gets in it, then you may want to run it a little differently.
I guess it's my turn to chime in here now. But the time I served in the mid 90s to the early 2000s in the Marine Corps was still doing that. Every Marine is a marksman or a rifleman. They kind of lived by that. I don't know if they're still doing that now, probably to some extent. But every Marine, I mean, you can't even graduate boot camp and you'll get washed back if you can't qualify in the rifle range, even at 500 yards as just a basic marksman, low level. So they won't even let you go, become a Marine, right? You'll go home if you can't shoot. So, but even after boot camp, no matter what your job was in the Marine Corps, cook, mechanic, everything, everybody went to about a 30-day basic combat infantry training. Didn't matter what your job was. You got combat infantry training for a month. You lived in the field. You shot machine guns, grenade launchers, the rocket launchers, all that stuff. Everybody had all that training. Didn't matter what you did. But, different story once you got to the fleet. You're in the fleet, and then it was, you're doing your day job, whatever that would be. And then you're only qualifying once or twice a year on, either an M9 or an M16A2 is kind of what we had back then. But that was it, really. But, deficiency, I'll agree with Will on the pistol training. That was not like, they were just like, here's an M9, here's how you load it, and there's the targets. And, I shot, we have 3 levels of qualification in the Marine Corps. You got your marksman, sharpshooter, and expert. And I was an expert every time with the rifle because we had plenty of training. But with that M9, I was what they call the pizza box, the marksman, the little square box on my chest. And I had no training. They're just like, here you go.
We actually, when I became a 113 driver, and so at that, like when I became a 113 driver, at that time, the drivers all carried a 9, and we returned our 16. And then for whatever reason, it got decided. I carried the M9 for 2 months, and then it was decided rack all of the 9s all the time. Only the officers will carry an M9, and otherwise they stay in the armory. And they gave me an M16 again, and so then I had to learn how to crawl out of a hatch with a 16 with an A2. But it was just decided that was not going to be the way anymore. It was like, for what we do, we don't need pistols. Either have a rifle or just don't. It's weird. But yeah, it was just, here's the M9, here's how you put it, and then shoot that thing over there. And I mean, there was no instruction at all. And same thing, I qualified sharpshooter, but barely.